Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. It's great to have you with us today. So much going on the global scene right now, and I want to talk a little bit about U.S. politics and the impact it's having here in Canada, and specifically here in Ontario in just a second. But speaking of Ontario, always great to get your feedback about podcasts that we've already done. And I heard from one of our subscribers just this morning, as a matter of fact, as we were preparing for this. His name is Jeff, asking me, I guess somewhat rhetorically, can you please explain how Doug Ford can be a champion for Ontario while he's playing footsie with the Trump administration? I get where you're coming from on this, Jeff. And for those who may not have been paying as close attention to this, I think what Jeff is referring to is that Doug Ford is an unabashed fan of Donald Trump. Said so as well late as last fall when Trump was reelected in the U.S. election. That he's a big fan, thinks the guy's a sensational businessman and a great politician, yada, 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 yada. Well, he changed his message, obviously, when Trump started talking about imposing tariffs. And all of a sudden, we saw Ford going on U.S. television, on Fox, on CNN, MSNBC, whoever would take him, I guess, and became a strong advocate. He says a champion for Canada against the Trump administration. Which all sounds well and good, but as we've said about politics in the past, don't just listen to what they say, watch what they do. And oftentimes, those things don't necessarily jive. And Ford maybe is a classic example of that. He is a fan of that. The other element to this, of course, is we don't need to forget about the fact that the Ontario government, a.k.a. Doug Ford and his team, signed a very lucrative deal with one of Elon Musk's companies, Starlink, just some time ago. Now, and again, when the idea of tariffs was introduced a few weeks ago, Ford said, we're going to scrap that contract. We're not going to honor that. Well, it's back on. After a while, Ford went down to Washington and met with some folks down there. So, yeah, Elon Musk's company is still going to benefit from here in Ontario. And the idea about exactly what's going to happen with this relationship and the Ford and Trump administration is yet to be determined. And I guess one of the things that bothered me and has bothered a few of you based on some of the responses I've received from you is the Ontario government's involvement with Fox News. About a week or so ago, Sean Hannity, who's the big cheese patty, of course, at Fox News these days, did an interview with Trump and, of course, the guy who's really running the United States right now, Elon Musk. Three of them sat down there and just basically did a chin wag, and it was just an opportunity for them to spout their stuff with nobody. Certainly, Hannity's never going to challenge anything these guys say. So it was a love-in, like an infomercial for Trump and his deranged logic. Guess who sponsored that? The Ontario government. You, me, our tax dollars paid for that Sean Hannity show that night on Fox News. Now, the justification for that, Ford says, well, we wanted to get the message out that Ontario is your friend. That's not the audience. I don't care if somebody in Dubuque, Iowa is listening to Fox News and here's a commercial for Ontario. That's not going to be, you do that at the political level. They spent our tax dollars to sponsor a show on Fox News. Who are the anti-Christ? They're the anti-Ontario, the anti-Canada. These are the people that want to take us over as the 51st state. You don't spend money on a show that's supporting these people. And I just don't get where the logic is here. And I don't get why there isn't more outrage that this is how the Ford government is responding. Are they secretly still going to try to say a side deal here? I don't know what's going on anymore. And as Ontario residents who are very concerned about the impact the Ford administration could have here, I'm kind of concerned about the dedication that this government is going to have and just how much they're going to fight what's going to be happening with tariffs, et cetera. And that I know politics has a dirty underbelly, but I'm very concerned about what, like so many other times we've seen in the past, what they say and what they actually do are oftentimes two different things, which leaves you and me as voters and as taxpayers scratching our heads saying, well, which one is the truth here and which one is BS? And we haven't figured that out yet. But it's something we need to keep an eye on, and we certainly will on this podcast. I also want to get into something, I think, a very, very important issue. I mean, oftentimes, we wake up one day and say, what the hell has happened? Who saw this coming? And what's going on in the States right now is creating a different dynamic that's going to have a profound effect, not just in America, but globally. And that has to do with Donald Trump and his treatment of the free press and the media. You need a free press. A free and independent process is very essential, is one of the hallmarks, one of the benchmarks, one of the foundations of a democratic form of government. There has to be contrary voices. There have to be critical analysis of what's going on. Well, that's being eroded at a pretty rapid pace in the United States right now. It started, of course, when Musk bought Twitter, called it X, and essentially said, well, we're going to allow free speech, which means anything goes. And it's become really just a right-wing, extreme right-wing platform for an awful lot of people in the States right now, so much so that an awful lot of Americans and Canadians and people right around the world have abandoned X and simply say it's nothing but a mouthpiece now for the extreme right political base, and that's a concern. So there's that. But we always thought, well, you know what, there's still mainstream media, there's still going to be contrary voices. Well, that's changing dramatically now, too, because of what's gone on. Jeff Bezos, who is, of course, one of Trump's disciples, bought the Washington Post some while ago. Now, the Washington Post is a newspaper that has a very storied history. This is the newspaper of Ben Bradley and Katharine Graham. They're the ones who did the investigation into Watergate and essentially exposed the corruption that was going on in the Nixon administration. The Pentagon Papers, Woodward, Bernstein, it goes on and on and on. Well, now Bezos owns it. And all that's gone, just gone. As a matter of fact, yesterday, Bezos basically said there was a new editorial policy for the Washington Post, which essentially means there'll be no contrary opinions and no critical analysis of what's going on with the White House right now. The way he worded this is exactly the same wording. It's almost the same press release that Musk used when he took over Twitter, basically saying that we're simply going to be a platform here for the right-wing views of the Trump administration. The editorial manager of the Post immediately resigned. Others have canceled their subscriptions. And whether you like the Post or not is immaterial. The fact is you've got government now controlling the media. And it's not supposed to be that way. Remember the phrase we used just a minute ago? Independent media? That's not happening so much anymore. We've seen this happen with some of the networks, too. CNN, MSNBC, which were traditional middle-of-the-road, maybe left-leaning to a certain extent, and we're a contrast to what was going on at Fox. They have now been taken over managerially and oftentimes in an ownership manner by people that share those extreme right-wing views. And we've seen that happen, well, with MSNBC in the announcement earlier this week. A number of their staff, amazingly, most of them people of color, have been fired, gone. Joy Reid and among others that have simply said, you don't have a job here anymore. We've seen that happen on CNN with a number of people have been let go over the last little while, and there's been a dramatic change in editorial policy there. And why it should concern us is because the movement here seems to be not to be the job of media, which is to basically be critical, to praise when praise is worthy, but at the same time to do critical analysis and inform the voters and inform the taxpayers about the good, the bad, and the ugly, about what government's doing and how they're spending our money or the other commitments that they're making. Well, that analysis is basically disappearing, and it's frightful. I mean, we've seen that to the nth degree. One of the first things that people with an autocratic point of government, and we've seen this happen, certainly Putin in Russia and so many others, Orban in Hungary, is they have to control the media because that's the message. And if they control the media, they control the message, they control the population. Well, the Trump administration seems to be onto that, and his minions, and we saw that happen the day he got inaugurated. I don't know if you stuck around to watch that, but the front row during the inauguration ceremony was not people of America. It was not the firefighters, the doctors, the people that make America great. It was the billionaires that supported Trump. Bezos was there. Musk was there. Zuckerberg was there, and a whole raft of other people that wrote big checks. And basically, I said, I've probably gone to Trump and say, okay, you owe us now. We're going to call the shots. And of course, he's not smart enough to be able to understand that he's being used here, that he's just a puppet, but he should be used to that because that's exactly what Putin is doing on a global scene, too. It's frightening because, we in North America and we globally who are members of NATO, of the G7, the G20 for that matter, always looked to the United States for a leadership role. And they've taken that role and not always done a good job, but they've been there and they've accepted the responsibility for that for time immemorial, from the time of Harry Truman to Eisenhower to Kennedy, and go right down the list, Republican or Democrat. They understood the role that the U.S. had to play in world affairs, world peace, and world economics. Trump has basically thrown that away and simply said, I don't give a damn. I don't care what's happening in the rest of the world. He just essentially echoed one of Putin's talking points the other day and simply said that the European Union, which of course was set up to offer some strength and solidarity for European economies, he said that whole thing was formed simply to try to kill the American economy. Well, that's bullshit, frankly, but it's one of Putin's talking points. And of course, that's what Trump does right now. He simply parrots whatever Putin tells him to say. Same thing with NATO. We know that Putin wants NATO destroyed. Trump is doing his best to try to do that now, too. We know that Putin wants to take over Ukraine, and that seems to be happening. Putin has his hand all over the quote-unquote peace process that's going on right now. Even the deal that's being proposed right now for the mineral rights in parts of Ukraine, the United States, of course, wants a piece of that action. Trump wanted to own it, first of all, simply said, you give it to us, you owe it to us. That has been tempered just a little bit. But in return for the rights and the access to those minerals, the United States and Trump is offering nothing in return. They're basically saying, hey, we support Ukraine's right to go and try to find some security so that there aren't future invasions, but they're not going to offer any help to do that. God bless you, go find somebody else if you want, but we're not going to put a nickel into it. Probably not going to give you any military support either, which is totally contrary to the U.S. policy in the past. Basically hanging Ukraine out to dry. And who knows what's next? We've already talked about, if Putin gets that, what's going to be next? What country's next? Because there will be more invasions and there will be more incursions. And you got to wonder about what's going to happen on the other side of the world once that happens as well. Because as we've talked about, when we're watching what's happening in Europe, China's watching. And of course, they have ambitions towards Hong Kong, and they're going to look right now and say, hey, if they can get away with it, we may as well march in there too. Who's going to stop us? There are ramifications to this, which is why the Americans have always understood that they have a leadership role and they have to be very judicious in what they do, understanding the ramifications. Trump doesn't care. Trump is all about himself. He's all about the billionaires who support him financially, and the rest of us can all go to hell, it seems. And that's problematic. There has to be a new world order right now, because where there is a vacuum of power and a vacuum of leadership, somebody else is going to move in there. And we've seen that happen in so many other countries when the U.S. has withdrawn foreign aid, for instance, as Trump has done. China moves in there. Russia moves in there. And they become the country that supports those people. Well, of course, that changes the allegiance of that country. Instead of the United States, instead of being a democratic process, they start leaning towards autocratic governments because those are the governments that are giving them the money. There are long-term ramifications to this. The world is changing, and a lot of it has to do with the American choice of Donald Trump for a second term. And now he's surrounded himself not with critics, but with simply yes people that are simply going to do whatever he wants. Even in the first administration, as bad as that was, there were people within the Trump administration, hardcore Republicans, hardcore conservatives, John Bolton, David Frum, so many others, who were critical of Trump and said, no, we are strong economic conservatives. We are Republicans in this, that way, and everything. But this guy's nuts. And those voices are gone now. There are no people to act as a buffer, to act as a voice of clarity in this Trump administration, because they've stacked the deck. The Supreme Court is on his side. He's got the majority there. He's appointed people who are simply going to nod and do whatever he wants. It's happened in so many other areas. It's happened with the FBI. Unqualified people, the only qualification these people have in that cabinet, if you saw the first meeting the other day, their only qualification is their loyalty to Donald Trump, not to the U.S. Constitution, not to the agencies to which they've been appointed, but to Donald Trump. That's not the way it's supposed to be. And you and I and everyone should be very concerned about what's going to be happening going forward. That's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks so much for being with us. And always, you can catch us on Substack, on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit the notification bell as well. Lots going on politically and the impact on you and me, and we're going to continue on future podcasts with this. As always, thanks for this. Stay in touch and stay informed. Brought to you by ELON'S Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. ELON'S Law, 905-522-1102 or ELON'slaw.com.